Welcome to Equilibrium Echoes, the podcast where we delve into the transformative power of your inner world on your relationships. I'm your host, Alyssa Decker. Join me as we unlock the secrets of emotional equilibrium and dig deep into the tools and insights needed to foster healthier, more fulfilling relationships in ways that feel safe and authentic. Welcome back to Equilibrium Echoes. I'm your host, Alyssa Decker, and today I am here with a very special guest, Markella Kaplani, whom I have just met, but I am very excited to talk with today because our topic is all about the transitions that happen as we get into new stages of our lives, in particular, parenthood. And if you are a parent, you already know this is a huge transition, both in your life, just as it stands for you as a woman, but also in your relationships. And by the way, if you're listening and you are not a woman, you are a male, don't tune out because we're going to be talking a lot about ways that we can connect as couples through this transition. So Markella, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this parenthood and relationship coaching.
Right. Hi. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's very nice to be here. And I'm just as excited to be talking about this and to be on your podcast. I have been a clinical and counseling psychologist for over 15 years. At the same time, I stumbled upon and then had the pleasure of working as a special educator, got myself certified, and I worked with children who had some academic differences. And so in that realm, I've had the opportunity to work with families holistically because I got to see individuals who were working through confidence issues and anxiety and depression. But then I also got to see children in the academic and the emotional setting. And then I also got to work with their families. And in all of this, before becoming a mother myself, I had this thought, something that bugged me. I saw all around me as I was working with kids that whenever there was something that a child needed, whenever there was some kind of difficulty with something, it was always the mother's fault. So even professionals in the field felt to me like they were blaming the parents and especially the mother. And so it was something that really stuck with me while I was working in that realm. And I really wanted to be supportive of parents. And I took that part on. But then as I became a mother myself and having the slight expectation that since I had seen the hardships and I had seen how harsh things are and I had seen the judgment, not that I would be a better parent than anybody else, not at all. The exact opposite. I just thought, hey, you know how tough it's going to be. You know you're not going to be great. And so you're going to be at least psychologically prepared for the avalanche that's coming at you because you know it's an avalanche, at least. At least you have that. But then I still got slapped in the face. I still was not expecting what happened, what followed, which was a complete identity crisis at some point where I felt like I completely lost myself. And honestly, my son is almost 5, and I'm still searching for parts of myself. I'm still reconciling parts of myself that have been lost. But I think just the realization that this is normal, just the realization that this is all valid and this is a process that women go through, and the fact that I found a name for it and I even got certified in it. It's called matrescence, and it talks about this transformation that we're bound to go through and to keep going through as we enter parenthood and as we continue to journey through all the stages that our children go through. I think that in itself made a huge difference in slowly being able to bring it all together, bring it all back. Oh, and a side note, there's also a term called patrescence, and it also talks about the change that dads experience, men experience in their identity as they enter parenthood. So it's not just the moms.
Interesting. This is really fascinating because I think it's something that most of us don't think about. I mean, because we don't have the background and experience that you do. And so that little baby is born, or maybe it starts even when we first find out that little baby is on the way. And we just, to borrow your words, get slapped in the face. Like we do not know what is even coming around the corner. And I think it's really interesting because I was thinking while you were talking that so often our mothers, our grandmothers, other, experienced women in our lives will kind of clue us in on some of the practical aspects. Like you're not going to sleep for a year, like your boobs are going to hurt all the time when you're nursing, like all these things that we discuss, but we don't really ever talk about what happens in your mind and your emotions and your heart and like all of this internal world thing, these internal world things. We don't have these conversations and we get completely blindsided, right? Is that what you find a lot of times in your
Very
coaching?
true. Very, very true. Yeah. And I have wondered why that may be. And part of as I started to work with mothers, the biggest reason was because I found that mothers hold a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. And I am not the type of person to hold shame much at all. Guilt is just one of the emotions, not negative, not positive. It is a signal. It tells us that we've done something that's not aligned with our values, and that's totally fine. But I was able to be okay with that. And then I would realize, okay, I'm not in line with my values. Let's do what we have to do and move on. Becoming a mother, I felt shame like I've never felt before. And there's this weight of expectation that we are holding as mothers and that society, keeps us in check with, that I started to wonder what's happening. Why is that there? And as I started to search for our generation and why women seem to hold so much shame, because I found very quickly that it's not just me, I realized that this is a big reason why previous generations did not talk about this. So they won't tell you about the mental and the emotional because especially in our parents' generation, it was completely absurd to talk about not losing yourself, right? Women, our mothers would never tell you these changes because it would be so wrong to even think that, my life changed and I couldn't find myself. There's so much shame involved in that because then questions arise, whether they're actually said out loud or they're thought, which are, do you regret being a mother? Did you not know what you were getting into? Was this not what you expected? And this happens in our generation, but it definitely happened in the previous one. And we can all agree that the previous generations in general were less allowed, were less permitted to speak up about these kinds of issues, even more than us. And even in our generation, where we say that we talk about things openly, even still, I have a lot of mothers that always have to preface, I love my child, but... So before they say something that might be even in the least bit negative about their motherhood experience, they feel the need to preface with, I love my child, by the way, like, don't judge me, and then say what they have to say. So I think that explains a lot about why we are talking about the practical things that are going to be challenging, but we don't talk about the mental and the emotional.
Yes, I've done that. I mean, I've said I love my kids, but like I need a break. Like a lot of we preface everything with that, like, and I guess that comes with the underlying feeling there is, I shouldn't be feeling these things that I'm feeling, or I shouldn't have these thoughts that I'm having. Right. And
Exactly.
then that is probably what leads to that shame that you were just talking about, is we feel like something is wrong with the way that we're feeling or coping or not coping. So give me like the 50-foot overview of what is happening in a woman's life when she has that first little baby.
So like you said before, it happens while at the moment that we conceive, and even before so, when we even consider becoming parents, matrescence is underway. We are already mothers in a sense. And what happens when we hold that baby in our arms is that we change completely. So what we've been taught to believe, or maybe not taught very overtly, but it's because it's never talked about. We don't expect it. But what we think is happening as we become parents is that we're adding on an extra role. And so if I'm a good employee and I am good at home and I'm good at a million things, I'm a good sister and I'm a good wife and, all of these nice things, and I can handle everything, and I feel like I'm a go-getter and everything that's on my plate I can do very well, then we have this notion that, okay, parenthood is going to be an extra responsibility. And given my history, I know that I will be good at it because I can handle extra responsibility. It's been shown. I have a good track record, kind of like a credit score or something. And then what happens is we come into parenthood and we realize that everything is changing. The way we view going back to work changes. So it could go either way, but it changes. We think, oh, I've decided I'll be a stay-at-home mom. And then we realize, oh my God, that's like such a big part of me. I want to go back. Or the opposite, I'm definitely going back. And then suddenly we get the urge to stay home. I don't want to go back. And so that's just one aspect. The physical changes, the hormonal changes, the social, the cultural, our relationship with the spiritual world, with our dreams, with the things that we want to do changes. And all of that together actually is because biologically our brain structure actually changes permanently after we become parents. And so we learn to think more in we than in I. We look at the world in a very different way. And for us women, in terms of matrescence, what's really interesting is that we are sucked into a much more feminine state. And in our times, most women are much more in their masculine. And so this becomes a very big shock. So a lot of women that I work with are a lot like me, very much in their masculine, very driven, very ambitious, go-getters, doing all the things. And then motherhood kind of puts you in a state where you're being called to look into your intuition and go with the flow and be relaxed. So what is being asked of us as to be good mothers, as mothers, is to be in flow and to be gentle and to do all these things. But what we've been taught so far in order to have value and to be worthy and to be admired is go, go, go. And so there's a big split that happens and we change. And we realize that as we are changing, this is not necessarily what is valued by society. Society will value these characteristics in the motherhood aspect, but it will value completely different characteristics in every other aspect, which then goes into a lot of internal conflict about who I am, how I'm supposed to show up, what is expected of me, how can I put these two together? And we don't realize that societally and culturally and practically, these can't go together. So a lot of times I get angry with the whole talk about balance when we become parents. Like, how can you balance parenthood along with your work and along with it? Because there is this implication that basically you can be both the perfect mother and the successful human being, the successful woman. And these two, a lot of times, are completely different. And when we fail to become perfect, quote unquote, on both of them at the same time, we think that we have an issue internally, that there's something wrong with us, that we can't cope, that we weren't meant for this, that we're right. And so we have this entire internal conflict because we don't realize that this is part of the process and that these two don't go inside. We have to carve our own path, basically.
And I think what Well, first of all, I think there's probably a lot of women listening right now who are completely identifying with what you have just said. And a lot of us probably have never heard it phrased that way before or heard it spoken about that clearly before. And at the same time, all of this is happening. Our relationship with the baby's father or a husband, a partner, has also completely changed. Right? So what does that look like? Like, what's happening in that relationship?
Well, let's first go to the fact that put it to the side, the fact that we just discussed that I am changing as a woman going through matrescence. So I'm rediscovering myself and I'm trying to reconnect to myself while I try to find my footing and see which parts of my old self am I keeping. There's a lot of shame in the fact that I'm trying to grieve my old self, and that's not okay. Why are you grieving your old self? Again, do you regret becoming a mother? You shouldn't regret.
Right.
You should have known what you were getting yourself into. And so all of this is happening for me internally, which is causing a lot of turmoil for myself. So this is why I talk about relationships, and I say that I'm a parenthood and relationship coach. When I say relationship, I don't just mean the couple. I mean the relationship to myself, the relationship to my partner, and then the relationship to my children, because they're all interconnected. So let's put me aside for a second, and then let's look at my partner. And let's assume that my partner is male, and he's going through putrescence. And as he is going through putrescence, which is even less talked about and recognized, he is not supposed to be going through this either, because nobody talks about it and nobody knows that this is happening. His brain is also changing, although research shows that in males, the brain changes less permanently. It's more temporary, and it has a lot to do with how much time they get to spend with the child in the first 6 months. But they're changing nonetheless. Their priorities are changing. What they want to offer to the family is changing. What their wife is or spouse or partner is expecting of them is also changing. So what's happening now is that we have two individuals who are going through their own journey into parenthood and through parenthood. And while that is happening, all these internal changes for each one, they could either be growing apart because they're taking different paths in that change. Maybe they're not talking about it. Most probably they're not talking about it because each of them feels very shameful for the fact that they're missing their old selves and all of these things. And they're worried that if I express this to my partner, will they think I wasn't ready to be a parent? That will they not trust me with the child because they won't think I'm so dedicated because I'm saying these things? And so a lot of couples don't talk about it. And as they change, they start to grow apart instead of grow together.
Yeah, that makes total sense, because even if you were very close before, like even if your relationship had very few problems, we've just thrown a bomb in the middle of this whole thing, right? Because everybody's changing, circumstances are like everything is changing. And then you add to this other layer of we're not talking about it, we didn't expect it. And I would think it's also additionally complicated by the fact that we're now both putting so much focus on this baby instead of on each other, right?
Exactly. Yes. That's exactly, I love that you mentioned that, because it's very societally approved and it's also practically right there. And then there's a baby that needs so much attention. And so it's really easy to shift our focus onto the baby because A, we don't want to talk about what's happening for us. We feel shame in that. And B, there's the baby that's taking up all of our time and we should be focusing there. And so we won't talk about it with our partner. And then we start to have resentment because we expect them to recognize certain things that we are not ready to express. We would just have wanted them to understand. We would have wanted them to see our point of view. But at the same time, we have a lot of reluctance in sharing what that is. And so a lot of couples grow apart in this resentment for one another because their needs are changing and they are not keeping up with what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I don't think we can overstate this, that we are not expecting it, and oftentimes we're not even consciously thinking about it. Like I know for me, when I had a baby, I was so focused on that baby and the circumstances that were changing and the relationship that was like everything that I was feeling sort of got put on the back burner, and I didn't even have the time or the energy, at least when I had a newborn, to address that or start processing it. And so I think I would assume, at least, you tell me because you're the expert, but I would assume for a lot of women, a lot of this sort of bubbles to the surface months or years later when they all of a sudden are like, oh my goodness, I need to do something here because things are off. Like this doesn't feel right, or there's conflict, or, things sort of come to a point where they're like, I got to do something. But maybe they weren't even consciously aware of the problem up until that point. Do you find
there's a lot there? I think it's very complicated. We are masters at putting things into the subconscious and ignoring things. I don't think that we don't realize what's happening, but it is easier to ignore it, especially because you said something before, and I do want to touch on that because it's very right. There's this myth that if we are a healthy couple and if we love one another, that we are going to be able to withstand the bomb of parenthood. And this myth is very detrimental to relationships, because what it implies is that when the baby does arrive, and if we start having issues, whether we actually talk about them or not, if I start to feel that I am no longer as close with my partner and I am no longer as satisfied in my marriage, and by the way, 90% of couples in the first year of a baby report not being satisfied in their marriage. It's bound to happen, is what I'm trying to say. This is a hopeful statistic, not a negative one. But because we don't think that this is supposed to happen to us, because we didn't have a baby to ignore our problems or to fix our problems. We had a baby because we love each other and we're really good. So this is not supposed to happen. The fact that it happens, what does that imply? It implies that we were not so much in love in the first place. We weren't in a healthy relationship. Was I wrong to pick this partner? Did I just want to have a baby? And and all of these kinds of questions start popping up because of that assumption that couples that are well with one another and are meant to be together are going to have this blissful parenthood experience from the get-go, and they're going to be able to communicate and cooperate very well because they had the right foundations. But I'm not sure if I answered your question as I made that parentheses.
Oh, that's okay. So let's talk about some of the practical things, because there are women listening to us really in all stages of motherhood, and fathers as well, who are like, okay, so where do I even start? Like I feel like the bomb went off. I feel like there are pieces of me everywhere. I don't know who I am. Like, let's start shift a little bit and talk about how do we begin to address this? Like, what are some steps that we need to start to take to get back to health?
If we're going to talk about the individual first, because that matters a lot before we get to address the issues within the couple, it's really important to look at the individual. It's really important that we recognize that this is a process that happens and it's bound to happen, so that we normalize and we validate our feelings. That is the most important step that we can take, is to be able to recognize that it's not just us. And that's why I like having these conversations and bringing this issue to the surface, because it's the very first step. And your listeners, if they are able to not just hear me say these words, but to really believe that this is the case. And I invite you to research. I invite you to get in touch if you don't believe me. I've got the research. It's really important that we believe that this is happening to a lot of women out there, to a different extent in different areas. So some women will be very okay with the financial aspect or the career aspect, but they won't be okay culturally, or they will experience huge changes in their spiritual world. For example, a lot of women will report not feeling as spiritual after they become parents. There's a lot of fear that bubbles up, whether that is in terms of postpartum anxiety or just maybe not diagnosable, but there is a lot of anxiety as we become parents and we want to have control. And this need for control pulls us away from believing and being able to release to a higher entity, for instance. So for everyone, there's bound to be changes in a lot of areas of life. It's really important so that we recognize this to be true and that we make it okay to grieve for our old self, to look at the parts that we miss, to look at the parts we could slowly start bringing back at some point, maybe not today, but maybe at some point, and to ask for support so that we can tap into things that we love and used to do for ourselves. I don't like to say self-care. I like to say self-connect, so that we can find small things that help us connect back to ourselves and feel good. That would be the first part. And then when it comes to the couple, it's just as important to recognize that because they're not having our experience and because they are not maybe getting as much heat, it doesn't mean that our partners aren't experiencing something quite similar in their own terms. And when we realize this, it's much easier to be compassionate with them as well. So just as we will be more compassionate toward ourselves if we validate and normalize what's happening for us, then we can show up as more compassionate for our partners too. When we are very harsh on ourselves, so I have noticed this pattern is when I have a woman in front of me, a mom who's very harsh on herself, and she won't let go of something that she's done and she blames herself for, and that wasn't a great parenting moment, she will say, and she will not forgive herself for it and move past it. She is just as harsh with her partner and her expectations of him. And so it's a little bit of a domino effect. If I start to be more compassionate with myself and I realize that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to feel this way, and it's okay to even sometimes feel like, I don't know. If I knew all of this, I don't know if I would have chosen to be a mom. And moms think like, oh my God, if I actually say that out loud, something bad might happen, or it might mean something about me as a person, that I'm an awful person, that I don't love my child. But this is part of the process, of the grieving process, and we are not allowing ourselves to experience it because of the shame. When I can do that for myself, I can then show up for my partner and say, hey, I realize that you're feeling this way, instead of judge them. Oh, you don't love our baby enough? Oh, you don't realize what I'm going through? So what happens a lot in couples is kind of a back and forth, a ping pong, that everybody's trying to prove how hard it is for them. Understand me, validate me, because we don't validate ourselves and we shame ourselves. We expect our partner to validate what we're going through, and we show up in a way that we didn't used to show up before. That's a big part of what changes between two partners who become parents, is in that whole chaos of huge change, as joyful as it may be, it's also a huge internal change, a huge practical change. We want to be understood and we want to be seen for how hard it is for us, and to be excused in a sense for the fact that we may look like we're not coping. And while we're in this and trying to get our partner to understand how difficult it is for us and to show us that they validate and this is all legitimate, we lose sight of them and we don't realize it. And when they are doing the same, basically what we're doing is we're just in our own world. Each of us is in our own world. And resentment grows from both sides. So it's really important to be able to take a breath and to trust that our partner has good intentions for us, that they want to see us, that they are there to listen, that they care, and to be able to let go and release. I've actually created, based on a lot of couples that I've seen, I've created a checklist, a communications checklist for couples that if you like, you can share with your listeners if they're interested, which kind of prepares, it's just like a one pager, and it prepares a couple to have difficult conversations like this, because you've got to start somewhere, and you've got to be able to say, this has been weighing on me. I feel you don't see this, for instance. I feel this way and I need it to be seen. And so in that checklist, I have like a pre-conversation part where we look at, am I prepared for this conversation so that I can enter it in the best terms? Then during the conversation, a little bit of a reminder of all the things that we should be doing, like active listening, for instance, being able to listen rather than speak and try to interject so that we can prove our own point and excuse ourselves because maybe we think that we are not being seen or validated. And then there's the post-conversation part where we kind of look at how can we wrap this conversation up on a good note, whether there was resolution or not.
So good. Like if we don't, like you said, if we don't start the conversation, and I think that really requires both people being willing to sort of set aside our own, this intense need for validation that we have, and being willing to validate the other person. Like both people have to be willing to come into this conversation and give something to the other person, and not just come in and expect them to come in and meet all of our, our needs. Sort of, it takes that first person, right? Whoever that is, somebody has to start this conversation. I think is what I'm trying to say. So, yeah. I'm going to shift just a little bit on you here, but I want to talk about this, this idea of I'm a bad mother. I'm a good mother. I'm a bad mother, right? There's so much conversation about this on social media and in society today. And, hashtag bad mom, like it's almost something that we joke about, and yet we do carry so much shame about it. And I think sometimes the fact that we make light of it in society, I think it does two things. I think one, we're trying to communicate, however an awkward way that is, to other moms. You're not a bad mom, right? We're all in this together. And I think we're also trying to, I think there's this underlying thing in a lot of mothers today where we're trying to figure out really if we are good moms, if we are bad moms. Like there's no standard, right? Or the standard feels like it keeps moving, So talk about that a little bit, like this whole idea or this feeling that we carry of I'm a bad mom, and how I think we do want to support each other in this journey, especially as women, right? Because if someone were to tell me that they felt like they were a bad mom, of course my immediate reaction would be, no, you're not, you're a great mom, right? So talk a little bit about that, like how we measure ourselves by these impossibly high standards, and how do we sort of get a healthy perspective on whether we're doing okay as a mother?
Yeah, so there is a lot of expectation that is weighed upon us. And even though we are trying to shift from it, we have a long way to go. We are much more able to practice being compassionate with others. I don't believe that we can truly ever be fully compassionate with someone else when we haven't achieved compassion for ourselves. But it is much easier to rationalize compassion when we are directing it to someone else. So on the note that you said that, if I told you I think I'm a bad mother, you would jump at supporting me and telling me, no, of course you're not. I'm sure you're doing a great job. But the fact that you are not able to do it for yourself, that happens to a lot of us, because we're able to say that, oh no, these standards that we have, this perfection is something that we can't reach. That on a rational level, I think at this point, we all get this. You will not ask someone, do you think you can reach perfection? And they'll say yes. I believe there is that, and I hold myself accountable. Everybody understands by now that perfection is something that's unachievable. Nobody can get there. But that's on a very intellectual level. On an emotional level, however, there are a lot of things that are going on that prevent us from being able to take that logic and actually apply it. And the emotional part of our brain is the more prominent one, actually, because it's a survival mechanism. Our emotions are going to guide us when we need to survive, and those always take over. So when it comes to us and the way that we are supposed to mother, it becomes very personal, and so it becomes also very emotional. And the emotion takes over despite all the logical and rational things that we know to be true about perfect parenting. In this case, we need to realize or to discover what the boulders are. A lot of times what happens is that we have a very loud inner critic that is very judgmental and is always there counting every step. And we judge that inner critic and we hate that inner critic and we want it to go away. But a better way to get the inner critic to not be so loud and to start to be more compassionate is to do the exact opposite. So in my work with people, what I do is I try to acquaint them with their inner critic. And just the way that we talked about with couples and how we can get closer to our partner by knowing and by approaching the conversation, knowing for a fact and telling ourselves that it's a given that they have good intentions for us. In that same way, we approach our inner critic and we say, why are you here? But asking, knowing that they have good intentions, that they're there as a protective mechanism, that at some point this inner critic became really, really harsh because it believed that this way they were protecting us. And then when you go back to the inner child, a lot of times those two are connected. So the inner child felt that in order to appease their parents or in order to get love or validation or acceptance, they had to be a very certain way. There were conditions for that love. And so the inner critic took the role of self-whipping so that I don't get disapproved and I don't lose the love of my parents. What we don't realize is that doesn't just go away because we became adults and we rationalized all of this and we told ourselves we no longer have to be in this role. And of course, my parents loved me. All of this is great. We can rationalize all we want, but the inner child is still there. And if we haven't broken those patterns, if we haven't tried to resolve this, if we haven't reparented ourselves, basically, then this is going to keep on coming up as an attempt to be the perfect parent, because that inner critic is trying to protect us from losing the love of our child now. So what we are being called to do as we become parents is to reparent ourselves while we are trying to find our footing in parenting our children. Because usually, even for those who have had therapy before, to be honest, but especially for those people who have not had the chance, the privilege, or didn't make the choice to see someone, didn't realize that these things were lying under the surface. A lot of us don't. They are met with this inner child who is not very happy that it's been treated so harshly, while we are trying to gentle parent, and it's going to rebel, and it's going to be a pain, and it's going to bring out in us reactions that resemble our parents' reactions, and we wanted to do differently. And so we wonder, my God, I said I would never do that because that's the one thing that I didn't appreciate from my parents, and here I am doing it. Why? Well, it's because we haven't reparented ourselves. Our inner child is kicking away and saying, well, you treat me this way, why should I accept you treating the other child? It's kind of like sibling rivalry. And so it becomes very difficult at that point not to judge ourselves based on bad mother, good mother. We play between these polarities because we are in our inner child mode, and as all children, it works in a polarity. You either love me or you don't.
Yeah. That was one of the best explanations, I think, of inner critic that I have heard. And I love how you broke that down and related it to what's happening when we become mothers, because we've all been there, right? We've all dealt with that sense of like, there is part of me that is never convinced that I'm good enough or that I'm going to be a good enough mother for this child. And I love your how you broke that down for us. So give me, before we wrap up here, give some words of encouragement to the woman who's listening, or even the husband who's listening to this and just feeling like very seen, right? And very, very much identifying with what you're saying. Give her some words of encouragement today.
If you are to keep one thing, I would want that to be that you are not broken. There is nothing wrong with you, and that this is a very normal process, because this parenthood thing is such a profound transformation, such a profound change. It's actually been documented and researched to be the biggest change that can happen to one's identity. It trumps adolescence. And so you're not alone in this experience, and there's nothing wrong with you, and you're not broken, and neither is your partner. And you can both look at each other and look at yourselves with a little bit more compassion each day. It's not going to happen overnight, but each day, just a little bit, try to connect back to yourself and to one another, knowing that you are doing a good job.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. All right. So Markella, tell us where people can connect with you, how they can find you, and work with you.
Well, on that note that I just said about reconnecting, I do have a self-connect calendar that parents can use in order to connect with themselves. And so it has like little activities that you can do that actually are in line with our real schedules as parents and all the expectations that we have, and not those self-care activities that you see being advertised, for a spa day or something, which for me, at least, it was impossible. And my son is 5 and I still have hardly had the chance to even do my nails, consistently. So I have that kind of a resource. There are several resources for free that parents can find on my website, markellakaplani.com, couples, parents. You can find me on Instagram at markella.kaplani. And the way that I work is I work with parents on an individual basis, mothers on the identity, on reconnecting to ourselves, on being able to reconcile that old identity with the new identity, the masculine with the feminine, to be able to drop that shame and the guilt, to work with the inner critic and the inner child, and to start breaking through generational trauma and all the things that are holding us back and getting in the way of being the parent that we envision. And I also work with couples who find that parenthood has shifted the dynamics and they want to rekindle the love and find their footing again and be able to be the partners that they want for one another and show up as they want for their children as well, because of course the way that they relate to one another has a lot to do with how their children are going to relate to them and to other significant people in their lives later on. So a lot of people recognize this significant impact that their relationship with their partner has, and that's why they come to me.
Awesome. Well, if you're listening and you have identified with this conversation, go to Markella's website, find those free resources, and book a call to talk to her. She is an excellent resource. And Markella, I just thank you so much for being here. I love the work that you're doing. I think this is vitally important, and there's not enough of you, not enough Markellas to go around. But I hope that some people listening today have really found you as a wonderful resource that's going to help them move forward through this amazing, incredible, and also very challenging journey. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Equilibrium Echoes. If you would like to learn more about the podcast, visit www.coachingwithalyssa.com/podcast. And while you're there, book your free consultation and download the preview of my new book, Marriage is Hard and Other Lies I Believed. I'll see you in the next episode.